So welcome everyone to the Family Business Institute webinar on helping contractors to plan during these uncertain times. I think some of the difficulty of these uncertain times was reflected yesterday in some of the technical difficulties that we encountered. So we certainly do apologize for that misfire. I think it was caused by some of the changes to the Zoom security requirements, and I think Zoom, while they're delighted in their sudden popularity, has realized that they too have had to scramble to make some changes to adapt to the environment that they find themselves in. So we aren't the only ones. I'm Bob Rainey. I'm the head of construction surety at Travelers. I want to welcome all of you. We have on the call contractor clients of both the Family Business Institute and Travelers. We have some of our valued agent and broker trading partners. We have some Travelers underwriters. So we've got really a great group who are a group of people who are very vested and committed to helping our mutual construction clients succeed in this difficult environment. You know, last Tuesday, I led an internal webinar here at Travelers, and the subject of that was pretty narrowly focused on the importance of building cash and liquidity in times of a crisis like this. And we talked about ways to do it. We talked about ways to measure cash adequacy. We focused in particular on the ability of a construction company to withstand a partial or complete shutdown of 6 to 10 weeks if it were to come to that. And the reason we arrived at that was derived from looking at the precedents of some other countries like Spain and Italy and France, who seem to be a few weeks ahead of us in our battle against the coronavirus. And I do think a complete or near complete shutdown remains a possibility. We should know soon. I mean, if our infection curves begin to flatten over the next week or two as expected, as we're starting to see and already starting to see actually in Europe right now, then, you know, I think we probably stay at the current levels of business restriction and social distancing. If it doesn't flatten, however, though, I think we do need to be prepared for the possibility that restrictions will increase, and that could include some broader restrictions on construction activities. But I do fully believe that we will get beyond the immediate COVID-19 impacts, and then I think there's some questions around what does our recovery look like, and no one seems to know, but increasingly prognosticators are becoming reluctant to say that things are simply going to bounce quickly back to where they were before. And I think all of that is why I think the material that is going to be covered today is just so beneficial. And, you know, Dennis Engelbrecht and John Woodcock have had a tremendous amount of opportunity to expose themselves to contractors and to study a lot of data about what might lie ahead. And they're prepared to give their thoughts on both the short term as well as how contractors might make good decisions in the period after that. And so really happy to welcome all of you here once again. And with that, I'll turn it over to Wayne Rivers to get things going with John and Dennis. Wayne?
Hello, Bob. Thanks, everyone. This is Wayne Rivers. I've got Dennis here with me and John Woodcock as well. We're with the Family Business Institute, and we build better contractors. Thank you for joining us. 2020 started off sort of business as usual, didn't it? We were all looking at having a solid year of volume and profits, and then nature threw us a tremendous curveball. Starting about the first week of March, the headlines trumpeted that for a period of weeks at least, 2020 was going to be anything but business as usual. The professional service firms and the trade associations and companies like Travelers did a really good job of getting excellent information into the marketplace super quickly. They talked about contract reviews, insurance coverages reviews, health and safety on the job sites, the CARES Act, and lots of other valuable information. This is going to be a little different today because so far, no one has given commercial contractors the advice they really need most, and that is how to run your business in unprecedented and unpredictable times. So that's about to change. John Woodcock and Dennis Engelbrecht have come up with a brand new tool to help any contractor plot with precision where his or her company stands in real time. And best of all, they've developed concrete action steps so you can plan specific tactics and strategies for leading your organization. So one quick housekeeping thing, if you use your cursor and scroll over your screen, you'll see that there's a Q&A tab down at the bottom right of your screen. So if you want to ask questions, we're going to take them throughout. We might have a few minutes left at the end, but we're going to take questions throughout. So don't be shy about asking questions. We'll monitor them here and get to them as quickly as we can. And the ones we can't get to, we can perhaps send emails and things like that later on. So with that, let me turn it over to Dennis Engelbrecht.
Hello, everybody. Let's talk first about what we're going to learn today. Hope we can deliver as well as our two speakers already promised. So if you look at the screen, you'll see the things that we want to cover today. Certainly, most economists would tell you that we already are in a global and United States recession, and most of them are predicting for it to be quite deep. So it's become apparent that it is time to put our heads down and start planning for what might be ahead. So we want to talk about the immediate preparations for this potential downturn. As we look at numbers 2 and 3 here, what we're going to present today is really a simple model to sort of assess where you stand in the market, which should help you decide which strategies to employ. And as both Bob and Wayne mentioned, there's so much uncertainty that even, as we judge your capital strength or we judge your future work prospects and we look at it today and we look at it a week from now, both of those could change based on, the upheavals that are currently out there. So I call the model simple, but using it, you'll have to stay updated and current as the fluid situation continues. We do want to talk in general about best practices for leading through these tough times and making decisions. We want to look at some of the options, pluses and minuses for critical decisions, and then, how to assess those trends, look ahead, etc. Probably the primary message, though, is that now is the time to be looking at these strategies and developing these strategies. Over the past couple of weeks, I've been in conversations with so many of you, and so many of you have done such a tremendous job of really reacting to the situation itself, getting policies and procedures on board, looking out for your people first, and setting really value standards and things like that for which to make good decisions in these times, and have done a terrific job. Now is the time to start looking at strategy. And my main point here is that if you don't form the strategy before you start making decisions, you may find that those decisions were not the right ones as you go forward. So, whether you've done strategic planning during the last year or 5 years ago, I'm not going to tell you that you almost have to throw it out, but you really have to take the current situation into consideration and really make sure you have the right strategy from here forward. And even that will need adjustment as the fluid situation changes here over the next several months. So let's talk about the critical actions for all contractors. And again, if I'm going to give you a piece of advice, every one of you as contractors on this call should do these 9 things. as advisors on these calls, every one of you should be encouraging your contractor clients to be doing these 9 things. The first of these is to lead strong. And again, in my conversations with everybody and in the peer conversations that y'all are having, I'm certainly witnessing this so far. I've seen the construction leaders step up in a way that really, should make all of you proud. It certainly made us proud as people who work with contractors, and just seeing great things from there. What I want you to remember is we're now in what a potentially long slog forward, and you're going to need to maintain that energy for leadership through this period and to continue leading strong. Number 2, and again, as Bob mentioned, develop strategies to preserve and build cash. Even in normal times, of course, that's an important thing to do. But in these times where jobs could just fall off the radar and things could turn more dire very quickly, you certainly need to be preserving cash and building cash. Number 3, which we're going to talk a lot about today, and John's going to talk a lot about, is stress testing performance, both cash flow and profit, to make sure that you have a run rate that's acceptable, to make sure you're looking into the future, near term and long term, to make sure you don't get in trouble, and to understand where your risks are. Number 4, we want you to evaluate your organization, your talent, and your structure. And there are 2 main points here again. I noticed in the AGC survey that they put the results out again late yesterday afternoon, that 27% of contractors report that they've already laid off workers. So again, if decisions are being made before you've formed a strategy, there's a potential that you're going down a wrong road today. So again, the encouragement here is to form the strategy before you do anything with this. But you do need to evaluate your organization, your talent, and your structure so that you can make rational decisions. All right, make sure, if there is a C level of employees or a D level of employees, you've identified those up front. You've spoken to your people down the line, and you know who should be vulnerable, who shouldn't be vulnerable, and you maybe prepare multiple lists. Again, we'll probably talk about this more as we go on, but make sure you do that in advance before you start making the difficult people decisions. The other thing I wanted to mention here is during this potential downturn, probably nothing will be more important to you than running your work successfully. So when you evaluate your organization, talent, and structure, and apply what that looks like to your future workflow, you have to make sure that you maintain the ability to run the job successfully. What you could lose from a job going badly is much more than you could gain by any overhead cuts. So make sure your first priority when you look at that is to make sure you're prepared to run your job successfully. Number 5, stay close to your clients and customers. Interestingly enough, a tough time like this is an opportunity to even get closer to your customers. They have tough decisions to make as well, and for you to be their trusted advisor and help them go through this can help you in the long term, help you maybe retain a negotiated basis with your customers as opposed to having them throw you into a competitive situation as we go down the road. John, next slide, please. Number 6, evaluate and manage your trade partner and supplier networks. That's become particularly important here in this interim period because I think 59% of AGC members as of yesterday reported delays and disruptions. And the most important delays and disruptions were coming from their supply networks. So, and again, many of you contractors have already done this, but your project managers and superintendents should be looking forward to all of your supply networks and double and triple checking to make sure that things are online or they're finding alternatives that go ahead, that allow you to continue to go ahead with your construction. But make sure your relationships are solid so that you get good information and get good support going forward. If the times get truly tough, you're going to need these relationships more than ever. Number 7, assess your financial and market positions, and we're going to cover that in detail today and with our new model, how to do that. Number 8, we ultimately want to develop these short and long-term strategies based on where your positions are, what it looks like for the future and where you look currently. And then number 9, we do want to encourage you to make the necessary decisions and take action. Again, we're encouraging you to plan first, then do those things to make sure you go down the right track. But taking action is going to be very important. You know, while I've already mentioned layoffs and things like that, making them too quickly, the other side of that doesn't look that good either. If you're a $100 million company, and let's just say you're a trade contractor and maybe have a 10% overhead, that's $800,000 a month in overhead. So if you did get shut down, as Bob mentioned, you know, here, and you're shut down basically for, let's say you're, you know, basically shut down for 2 months, that's $800,000 plus a month that's outgoing without any revenue, potentially. And if you're a GC, and let's say you're $100 million and operating on a 4% overhead, that's $333,000 a month. So the effect of not making the decisions you have to make, of course, can have dire results as well. So really encouraging you to make the decisions you have to make and take action. And that's why we think it's so important to do this planning now, to make sure that you're in a position to make the best decisions as you go forward. So let's talk a little bit about the leadership side of this. Again, I think of those of you I know, I think you're doing a great job so far. Key points here: communicate more, not less. You know, it's very natural in tough circumstances to sort of regress, put your head down and plow. And that is clearly the wrong thing to do, because your people are uncertain and your people need you to step forward and lead and show them the way. So in doing so, you know, it is a very uncertain future out there. You have to somehow be able to create and continue a positive vision for that future so that your people are confident and can come in and do the work that they need to do day to day without being distracted, you know, by their nervousness about what could happen. Get more personal. Be visible, be accessible. One of my clients yesterday sent me a video he sent to his entire company. Be doing that. I had a client that the weekend before last phoned every employee on his payroll over the weekend and just had a personal conversation to let them know the company was solid, they were still working, things were good. So very much encourage you to do that the best you can. Visit every job, touch the 4 corners. You don't need to have all the answers. And one of our members, Ken Pilcher, sent me one of his videos, and it was terrific the way, you know, he said, well, obviously as leaders, you don't have all the answers in communicating that to your employees, but what you do have is, you know, many of you have set up executive committees that are meeting regularly during the week and making these decisions and reacting to the things that are happening. So people will accept that you don't have all the answers if they know you have a methodology for seeing what's happening and doing it. And then finally, you know, as a leader, staying in business is vital. It's interesting in these tough times, most of you have put the people first, make sure you care for the people, And as a business leader, you want to put your people first, but remember, as a business, you can't take care of your business unless you take care of your company. Because if your company's not there, nobody works, and nobody can be successful. So you have to watch your viability. You have to make sure you're taking care of yourself, you're taking care of your business. Finally, the quote at the bottom here, one of our cohorts, I think it's a terrific one, and it really applies to these times, is construction's a tough business for tough people who make tough decisions. And with that, I want to turn it over to another cohort, John Woodcock, and John, take it away from here.
Thanks, Dennis. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and have a chance to interact with all of you. I want to piggyback off of one of Dennis's last comments about the importance of having a business and sustaining a business through this. And it's no secret that much of what Dennis has already talked about is leadership. If you go back to the previous few slides, that was the real focus. There's no secret there. Leadership, whether that's organizational leadership, your strategic leadership, or your tactical leadership, is never going to be tested like it gets tested through a difficult business cycle. Everybody's either heard or probably read Jim Collins' Good to Great, one of the great business epistles of sort of the 20th or 21st century. Jim talks in there about his encounter with Admiral Jim Stockdale, who was the highest ranking military official imprisoned in the Hanoi Hilton during the Vietnam War. And when he was talking to Admiral Stockdale, he was asking him, how in the world did he actually survive through that without knowing the end of the story? And Admiral Stockdale was quoted as saying, "I never lost faith in the end of that story. I never doubted that not only would I get out, but that I'd also prevail in the end and turn that experience into a defining event in my life," which in retrospect, he would not trade. And from that, Jim Collins developed this critical kind of thinking around that's been written about in Good to Great, which is the Stockdale paradox. That and Admiral Stockdale's sort of travails probably were far more significant than anything any of us have experienced. But the fundamental truth there is we got to retain the faith that in the end, our businesses and our organizations are going to prevail regardless of the difficulties. But at the same time, you've got to confront the most brutal facts of the current reality, whatever they might be. Looking forward, looking back at the facts and looking at the data right now, and the reality that we're living in and the reality that we may face, which economically may continue to get more difficult, is a reality that we have to confront. Let's with that in mind, and we'll kind of come back to that notion here in a little bit. But with that in mind, let's talk about how we face those realities and the challenges that any business cycle, whether it's a V-shaped dip or a longer U-shaped recession, what might that mean for us? So, focus on our leadership, and here we're kind of talking about tactical and to some degree strategic leadership. Dennis is going to talk much more about some of the strategic opportunities and challenges that we'll face here. But let's talk first to set that up about sort of the near-term tactical things that we all need to be thinking about. It's never more, the old adage that cash is king is never more true than it is now in a dip in the business cycle. Cash and having cash as a resource to help us navigate our businesses through a cycle like this is critical. So, there's a number of things that many of you have probably already done. We know you're doing many things that you can be doing, but a few critical ones are making sure that your lines of credit are secure. And if you have access to those lines of credits, think seriously about drawing on them while they are available. That may not be the case 2 or 3 months from now. So while you have access to those, draw on them. There'll be a cost to that, but that cost is probably negligible compared to the benefit to having the free cash available. If you've got more than the current FDIC limit of $250,000 on deposit with your bank, think about spreading that out. Not to suggest that your banks will fail, but that's a fairly simple risk management tool that you can enact, not knowing what sort of the potential impact this recession may have on financial institutions. Spread that risk out across 2, 3, 4 institutions if you've got the resources that make sense to do that. Look at and assess your investment strategies, both from a liquidity and from a bonding standpoint to make sure that you've got the right strategies in place and the right capital structure in place. And, most critically, work your receivables and your billings. Never is it more critical to have your project teams accurately billing, timely billing, getting costs billed, whether it's to your general contractor, if you're a trade contractor, or if you're a GC to your owner, and then work hard to get those receivables collected. Continuing with that, in good times, early pay programs make a lot of sense. There's discounts that you can take advantage of. Right now, though, cash in the bank is the priority, and getting a 2% discount on a early payment versus being able to hold on to cash for another 30 days and give you some options with that cash is a lot more valuable in our opinion. And some of you may, if there's an opportunity to, if you're accelerating payment and payables to your vendors, that's good, and that can be real good business and a way to build a relationship with the supply chain. But this is a time when everybody needs to be doing what they can to preserve cash and becoming real familiar with the payment terms of their supply agreements and their subcontracts, and stretching that, managing that cash flow, and not paying early. Pay according to terms. We're not suggesting that you harm somebody else as a result of this, but there's no need at this point in time to be paying early. There's other things that you can be doing, like looking at any capital expenditures or investments that you have. Really vet those and make sure they're important. Look at your plans for maintaining your fleet, your equipment or your vehicle fleet. More than likely, utilization of that fleet is going to drop off during a downturn. Get better utilization out of it. You don't necessarily need to be spending the maintenance and repair dollars that you had to when your fleet was under a lot of strain and fully utilized. John, if you could go to the next slide, please. So, with lots of attention being paid to cash, we now want to sort of divert and talk about what the future cash generation outlook for the business might be. We encourage you to think about this cycle in terms of duration. This could be a short-lived sort of V-shape, maybe a deep dip, but a quick rebound. And the recession may, extend across a couple of quarters. But what if there's a longer duration like we've experienced in previous business cycles like 2008 or 2009? So you need to be thinking about that in terms of, a 6, 12, 24-month cycle. There could be short-term impacts, but what happens if this decline and downturn lasts longer? Think about it in terms of both of those scenarios. A few things to really start with there. Start by looking at your contract backlog. As we talk to our contractors and our peer groups, we know many of them are doing that and well down the road on that. But what projects that are under contract may slow down. What contracts, even under contract, may terminate. Consider, for example, the owner's source of funding. You may have a project that is under contract and secure in your backlog, but if that owner's source of funding is at risk because of the downturn, then certainly that project may be at risk. Look at your awarded work, the work that, whether you call it backlog or not, may not yet be contracted, but it's certainly something that you're expecting and have been planning on executing and counting on to generate revenue. That work is probably more at risk than work that is under contract. And then lastly, revisit your business development pipeline, your sales pipeline. Give consideration to the particular sector that those projects are in. There are clearly going to be sectors we already are seeing that have been more immediately impacted, hotels and hospitality. I learned the other day that even in our neighborhood in here in Raleigh, a fairly significant project at the RDU airport was indefinitely postponed. So whether that project goes away or its start date is impact remains to be seen, but there certainly will be impact there. And these sorts of things ought to be factored into your forecasting model, however sophisticated or rudimentary a model that you use. And lastly, think about the margin potential. Downturns certainly shift the leverage in pricing to construction buyers rather than construction suppliers. So give some thought to not just top line, but to bottom line impact on your pipeline. When you think about your forecast and what your future outlook might be over the next 6, 12, 24 months, this is a good time to sort of stress test that scenario. We encourage you to develop a baseline forecast. I refer to baseline as being what you believe based on all the facts and the data that you've been able to gather from the marketplace, from your teammates and advisors and customers, and adjust your business model to what you think that future base case is going to look like. And begin to take the clear actions, which Dennis has already alluded to some of those, and we'll talk a little bit more about them here momentarily, but begin to take the clear actions to adjust your business to that sort of that baseline case. But also develop a worst case scenario. That could assume a deeper or deeper downturn. It could assume a longer downturn or more impact on margins. But develop a worst case scenario. You don't necessarily aren't at the point where you want to take actions to adjust to that worst case, but you want to know what that looks like. And there's clearly a best case scenario with minimal impact, but that's the good news. That's not something we should be planning for. Hoping for the best is not a viable strategy. Back to the Stockdale paradox, I love the part of the book where Jim Collins asks Admiral Stockdale, he says, well, who didn't make it out? And the Admiral says, well, that's easy. It was the optimists. Those prisoners died of a broken heart because they expected to get out by Christmas. But it was the folks that were able to have a realistic view about their predicament and then plan accordingly. They had the wherewithal and sort of the stomach to work through that difficult time. So, in adjusting to that baseline or thinking about adjusting to a worst case scenario, there's a near term, fairly quickly adjustment to your cost structure that's in order. You're probably all thinking about that, and many of you are probably well on the road towards making some of those adjustments. Certainly, most of you have. The last cycle was only 11 years ago, but most of you remember that and learn lessons from that. But and we all know that in this business, 70% or more of the overhead is generally tied up in people. So nickel and diamond at the edges is not going to have the impact. Looking at people is really unfortunately the difficult place where we need to start. Also, encourage you to look at the other items, non-people related, in your budget that are fixed versus variable costs. Truly try to, get a handle on knowing what your fixed obligations are, costs that you've got to cover or fund with cash reserves, regardless of, how quickly we get through this. Lease obligations, equipment financing obligations. And then identify and make sure you know what your variable costs are, those costs that can and should go down with volume and or that you have control over to make changes. Clearly, people is once again the most significant cost that we have the ability to make changes around, and unavoidably many of us will have to do that, and we'll talk in a minute about some of the best ways to approach that. A couple last, real quick points here: eliminating the low value added discretionary spending, whether those are season tickets, club memberships, those are things that I think are in these times ripe for eliminating, or at a minimum shifting to personal accounts if you're a business owner, to take that burden off the business. It also can, many times send a better message to your teammates. And the good news here is after a long-running expansion, overhead budgets are usually pretty full of non-critical spending. So there are probably a number of things that aren't adding as much value as we think they are, and this is a time to take a really good, quick, hard look at that. But as we do that, also maintain the long-term mindset and focus. The Stockdale paradox reminds us to have sort of faith in our future and faith that we will survive. So we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We want to continue to invest in the things that are critical and have been critical to our past and are critical to our executing our strategies and differentiating our businesses. So critical and important talent development strategies ought to be some of the last things that you think about making cuts to. Best-in-class systems and processes that are fundamental to executing your work in the field are very important. We mentioned that 70% of the construction overhead is in people costs. So if we come back to that and we think about that critical, significant cost item, one thing that business owners and leaders can do, and I've read something recently from Gino Wickman, who's the author and founder of the whole EOS movement, Traction. Many of you are probably familiar with that. He suggests that you think about what he calls his people organizer, what we would all call an org chart. Think about your org chart he throws out the idea of what's your org chart look like with your business half the size as it is. Well, I'm going to take a spin on that and say, well, think about your org chart in terms of your current sort of the baseline forecast and your worst case forecast. This needs to be a thoughtful process. This is not my business is going to shrink by 30%, so I'm going to ask every department head to cut 30% of their overhead. That's not what we're suggesting, nor is it, I think, what Gino's suggesting. You want to think about how you're going to run your business if it, over the course of the next couple months, becomes 70% of the size that it was last year. How does that change how you want to approach selling work, estimating and pricing work, executing work in the field, and building and maintaining the organization you all have worked so hard to create. And then adapting and adjusting your people resources accordingly. Every business is going to take a different approach to that. Every business is going to think differently about where those overhead dollars, particularly in people, need to get invested. but thinking today about what that organization could look like and still be able to thrive and succeed and execute is something that probably deserves our attention today. Good, John. Take action. Again, Dennis mentioned this early on. This is a time to take action. Making these cuts don't become any easier. So we really encourage our clients and others listening in to take immediate steps to adjust to the baseline scenario as quickly as you can get to a good understanding of what that scenario is. Don't do it incrementally, hoping things will get better, is my encouragement to you. And some of that comes from experience. When a business I was leading in 2010, coming out of the Great Recession, and our backlog started to get impacted, I made the mistake, and we made the mistake of not making adjustments quickly enough and deeply enough, hoping that we wouldn't have to make as deep an adjustment as we had. And so, we ended up in a bit of a scenario that I call death by 1,000 cuts, and that can really destroy morale and culture. People start to wonder after 3 or 4 small cuts, when's the next one coming? Your good people are quickly looking for opportunities to leave to a safer haven, versus taking a deep cut to the point where it may be a little bit painful or for a while, but then being able to move on and operate with that foundation in place. But at the same time, we want to do that with sort of the care and respect that you all run your businesses with, because at the end of the day, we're going to survive this, and we're going to have businesses that we want the good people that didn't have a seat during the downturn to have a seat to come home to. So how we communicate that and how we make those adjustments with care and respect is really critical. And everybody will be in a different place in terms of how they do that, depending on the market that they're in, depending on whether they're a union or non-union shop, but doing it regardless with care and respect. This next slide really just reiterates the point that the significant impact is in people. Headcount reduction is typically a better strategy than reducing pay or benefits. Pay cuts, across the board tend to reduce morale and therefore productivity. But if there are cuts to be made, or if that's a decision that the business and you and your leadership team make, then we believe in the best organizations start with the leaders themselves. That is what leaders do. They take the first hit and they take the biggest hit. And they take that, whether that's in base compensation or discretionary and profit sharing bonuses. This is typically a time where those are going to be significantly reduced or suspended, but starting with the leadership team is the best place to start. And raises are usually in your planning, factor in that raises are going to be mitigated. There may not be raises during a period of time, but the point here is, one, that they're probably not expected and can be delayed to preserve cash, with the exception of sort of key personnel, but that sort of thinking ought to be factored into your forecasting.
Yep, John, all good stuff. And I think for those on the call that are listening, I think what John's telling you to do is, if you haven't fired up Excel yet and started doing some significant financial modeling work with your controller and your financial advisors, you're already behind the 8 ball. So you've got to start looking immediately at best, worst, and median case scenarios, so that you don't get on the wrong side of this thing.
And the word contingency planning, I don't think John specifically used that word, but a lot of this is contingency, because we are in such an uncertain time. We don't know what's going to happen next. So we just want you to be prepared for all the circumstances, and this is what it's about. But coming back to, what should your strategy be going forward? a lot of that, today finds us in construction for the most part, at least if we track back at least a month ago, in a great, great place. Most of you probably have your capital situation in your company at the best it's ever been. Backlogs this year, I know at least for our membership, was still up significantly. So we had the best backlog and pipeline in our history. And we have good capital strength in general across the board. So given those things, perhaps we don't have to make cuts, but what should we do? And how do we know what to do, based on running these scenarios and seeing where we are? So that's where we come to this sort of new model that we've been looking at. So clearly your strategy does depend on your individual situation. And, even now as we talk to businesses across the country, some of you are running business as usual. All your projects are still going on. And I've got other contractors who are 100% shut down and don't know when the end is. So, and then going forward, of course, some of you are involved in different sectors, different regions of the country that are each hit differently. So your situation is not the same as everyone else's situation. And so as you enter this crisis, you enter it in a different financial condition and you enter it in a different market condition. And so, essentially what we've done is we've developed a scale here that basically measures you along these two axes. So the first is your financial strength axis. Where do you stand on the financial strength? And the second, the strength of your future work prospects. And the strength of your future work prospects isn't just your backlog, but it's really the profitability in your backlog. The amount of gross profit you're going to generate by that backlog is more important than the revenue numbers themselves. So we want to look at both of those. So as you look at this model, you'll see the financial strength line going up. And of course, if you were going to place yourself on this model and you have great capital position going in, you're going to be on the higher two quadrants of this axis. And then if you look at the future work prospects, again, low on the left side, high on the right side, if your backlog is good, you're going to look at being on the right side and having a quadrant 2 or quadrant 4 strategy. And if your backlog isn't so good or you've had a lot of fallout because of the current situation, then you may be back on the left-hand side of this axis. So let's go ahead and move on to how you make this assessment. So on the capitalization side, first of all, as you look at this first slide, I do want to apologize for any of the trade contractors out there because the numbers you're looking at here are for GCs, first of all. We have a white paper that will be coming out in the next week or two, and that will have the detailed areas on here for various trades. So you'll get more detail there, but this is more of an example, really just shows it from the GC side. But in terms of capitalization, what we've done is we've identified 6 factors for you to measure where you are. And we've identified for each of these 6, the median place where we see most contractors, and this is based on data that we get on a national level from our RMA University, and where they don't have detailed data, it actually comes from our internal benchmarking data. But as you look at each of these, the median is the median place where contractors are, again, general contractors in this case, across the country.
It's 50th percentile, right?
50th percentile, right. And then the range reflects lower quartile to upper quartile. So that's 25th percentile to 75th percentile. So it isn't the top or the bottom. This sort of puts you in that middle half of the range. So you can see where median is, and see where you're stronger or weaker. And as you look at this, by the way, the lower numbers there on the left of the range, those are the upper quartile numbers, where actually the lower number is better capitalized, the higher number is less capitalization, meaning you're basically taking more risk for the amount of capital that you have in place.
Right, and the white paper has a handy scoring tool in it, so you'll be able to score yourself pretty easily according to these various measures.
Yeah, and a much more detailed scoring tool, I might add. We're presenting today just a very simple scoring tool, which is basically if you're better than median on more than half of these, you're in the upper quartiles, and if you're below median in more than half, you probably belong in the lower quartiles. And again, if you're near the middle, that just sort of gives you a position on the graph, so to speak. So, you could be way in the upper right-hand quartile, the best place to be, or you could be somewhere near the middle and not have as many options, let's just say. So what we want you to do is grade yourself essentially on each of these 6 metrics, look where you stand, and try to place yourself on the metric as far as your financial strength. Now, when we look at the other scale, the future work prospect scale, this one is definitely much more fluid and much more subjective, right? But your baseline measure should be your normal. So if you normally have 8 months of backlog and you have 10 months of backlog, well, 10 months is better than your norm of 8 months, right? So you're better than normal. If your backlog, which most of you, have sold your backlog at the top of the market and has great margins, that's better than normal, right? As opposed to, if you've gotten some work just recently and it was more competitive and your margins are down, obviously that's sort of less than normal. So what we want you to do is look at your short run revenue, what that looks like, your total backlog, and even your sales pipeline, and make an assessment of where these are. And obviously you have to bring into affect the current situation. If you're having projects cancel, as John mentioned, projects that might be at risk of canceling, you have to make some judgments here. And then based on, what industries you serve, as John mentioned, if you're subject to the travel, tourism, hotel, hospitality sector, you can expect there's going to be a lot less money spent there, so you could probably discount your backlog in those areas as well. And again, you got to look at each sector individually, and again, even factor in your region of the country in terms of how you do that. So, and then think about margin pressure. As John mentioned, as you get further into a recession, the change comes in supply and demand. And if you have a longer backlog, one that takes you through 2021, and again, that's been gotten at today's rates, you're probably in pretty good shape. But if you keep a shorter backlog and have to recreate that going forward, it's likely by the end of this year, margins are going to start getting tighter, and you're going to have to grade yourself down for that, right? So again, basically, though, we want you to take each of these 6 factors, grade yourself, and then try to place yourself on the chart to see where you would be. So we create a couple sample companies to give you an idea, again, of how you assess your position. So as we look at Company A here, this is a GC with 35% self-perform, and we will look at a couple of trade companies here. But the GC, in this case, has a very strong capital position at 17% of revenue. Remember, the median was 12%, so they have more equity to revenue as a ratio. And their cash position's strong. They've got 13 months of overhead covered in cash, and that doesn't count their credit line. So they can sustain into the future. Their backlog is good, up 15% from recent norms. The gross margin in their backlog came in at top of the market pricing, and it's largely government and healthcare focused, so they expect it's going to hold up under this environment, at least for now. So they project, losing maybe 10% of their 2020 revenue due to project cancellation or delays. You know, many of you have had delays of 60 days here on some projects, things like that. That is going to factor into your revenue, so you have to take that into consideration. But if your backlog was up 15% and you lost 20%, you know, from delays or cancellations, you're still only down 5% with top of the market pricing. You're still probably at a very profitable situation in that case. Break even, you know, John didn't discuss break even much, but break even is one of the key concepts in this whole planning thing. Those of you who operate at higher margins actually have a lower break even relative to your normal operating level. And
Trades would have a higher break even on average than GCs, for example.
As long as they were profitable.
Right.
Yes, as long as they were profitable. But yeah, those who are operating at a higher profit generally will have a lower break even as a percentage of sales. In this case, their break even was 70% of last year's revenue. As I mentioned, if we already did our quick math, they'll probably only fall 5% below last year's revenue. So they still got 25% there, you know, to be producing profit, and they got a pretty good safe area there. In terms of people, this company was close to right-sized in the past year, possibly a body or two short at any given time. So when we looked at their primary strategy, we had them upper right quartile, take advantage. They're in a position to take advantage of where they are, take advantage of other companies' weaknesses in the market, because they can withstand a few hits and still be profitable and still come out the other end.
And they have opportunities to pick up people potentially. They're a body or two short, so they get a couple more key people, they're even stronger in the future.
Exactly. And then as a secondary strategy, we looked at the future focus group too. So we kind of gave each one a primary and secondary strategy. So Company B, a GC with minimal self-perform, this company had a middling capital position of 6% of revenues, just a little bit below, below the norm in the lower quartile. Their cash position was also middling at only 6 months of overhead. They had a good credit line facility, though, which could add another 9 months if they executed it.
Well, as a former banker, I can say that, you know, credit lines come and they go.
Well, that's why John suggested that you may want to access or at least solidify your credit line. So their backlog was great, though, at 40% over last year's revenue. But it's a vulnerable backlog with a mix of hospitality and industrial in there. I know one of the industrial already closed down and may not restart. The projected gross margins are okay, but they had some performance issues last year, so they can't count 100% on their gross margin they have in their backlog. They do expect as much as 50% fallout of their projects that aren't yet started. So as we look at their break even again, they weren't quite as profitable, so their break even was at 80% of last year's revenue, which means they're in a more vulnerable position to a downturn. So they might be utilizing more of that contingency planning. Their baseline plan may be lower, but they also might need to pay attention to their worst case scenario. So this company was a bit short on experienced talent already, and that inexperience probably cost them some profit. So where we thought they belonged was in the quadrant 4, the cash focus. They weren't in the position where they really needed to cut back drastically at this point, but that hunker down is there as their secondary strategy. If they get a couple of hits in their backlog or they get a project going bad, they could very quickly be in that hunker down position. So a couple of trades here to look at. We had one mason who had a middling capital position, around 16% of revenue, a little better than average, but just barely. Cash position was actually weak at only 1 month of overhead, so they were running without much cash, sometimes into their credit line. They had some long-term debt. They do have a substantial credit facility, but as Wayne mentioned, you know, that could always get pulled. They do have a great backlog, great pipeline of work. All of that looks pretty good. It's pretty diversified, great margins. Again, top of the industry gross margins, so they look pretty good for probably even the next year and a half unless something drastically happens. They do project losing less than 10% of their upcoming revenue due to cancellations or delays. They actually haven't seen any yet. Minimal lost time due to the pandemic, but the potential impacts could be uncertain for the long term because, their market could be vulnerable, to some slowdown. So their break even, again, was pretty low at 60% of last year's revenue, which means, a couple of hits and they're still in pretty good position between their backlog and their low break even. Also, they have a great team, always looking for more good people, as most everybody is. So we really still, even though their capital position was sort of middling, we still had them in the take advantaged quadrant. But because their capital position was a little weak, their secondary strategy was cash focused. If something goes a little bit wrong, they need to be looking at that side and probably need to be applying some capital strategies now just to protect them if they go down the road.
Basically, everybody's in cash focus mode right now, aren't they?
Well, at least as a third strategy, if not the second, and in some cases the first, is we look at our company D. So with company D, a mechanical contractor, they have a weaker than desirable capital position with a limited credit facility. So really not a lot of room for error, if you will. The backlog's good compared to most years, but their backlog tends to run more short term, so they're used to only having 6 months of backlog, but that makes them kind of vulnerable in this environment because you don't know either how much work's going to be available to replace that backlog or what kind of margins you're going to be able to achieve on that work. So that puts them in and they're in some vulnerable sectors, so that puts them in a pretty vulnerable position. There is lots of uncertainty about job delays, and actually if you're a trade, most all of you have uncertainties about job delays because you're not in the know as well as the general contractors in a general sense, where that might happen. You're one communication down the line, if you will. Break even, they didn't have the greatest margin last year, so break even was only 80% of last year's revenue. So again, you could see where if the workflow doesn't keep coming in, they could easily fall below break even. Unfortunately, they just got their team where they wanted it. Things seem to be rolling for the future, and these guys would hate to restart this process again if they have to cut back. So they'd love to keep their people. However, we did kind of place them in the hunker down quadrant because there isn't a lot of room for error. So they might have to make cuts early and work a little harder and really put their nose down and grind to work through this. So again, if we just look at the model again, you can sort of see the theme for each of these groups. Upper right-hand quadrant, they're in the best position, both from the financial and future work prospects. Quadrant 3 on the lower left, the hunker down group, they're at risk and they got to be taking decisive moves now to make sure they can stay in business and get through this thing. So let me talk a little bit about the specifics of each of these positions. So our best advantage people take advantage, sort of the theme of this group is to, go strong, reinvest the profitability to solidify your team and your markets and position yourself as a market leader, both during the downturn and for after the downturn. Great people and teams are paramount to long-term business success. This slowdown will probably offer opportunities to draw rainmakers, project managers, pre-con leaders, and supers. Look for employees who can raise your experience level in these, in important sectors and those with potential client relations. Set aside an investment fund to maintain and reward your current staff. Keep your best together. During the last downturn, one of our really wise leaders, Gerald Rawls, sat in a meeting with me. He told me, I'm going to put down $1 million if needed to keep my team together, meaning he was willing to lose $1 million to keep his team together. And you know what, he never had to spend that $1 million, but his willingness to put that on the line showed great effect in the long run, the faith he had, you know, in his business and the faith his people were able to have in him. So, and remember though, addition by subtraction. So even if you're at the top, this maybe gives you an excuse, you know, as humane as many of us are, and we've been carrying the non-performers, sometimes this gives us the motivation still to call those people that are detractors to your organization.
And you know, you make a great point, because they could be people that bring in work profitably, for example, but they're bad fits in the culture, or you know, they rub people the wrong way, or they rub customers the wrong way. So it's not all about the money here with respect to the people. We're also looking for ways to shore up the culture. Remember, these are our most advantaged contractors here, the ones in the best seats on the bus right now. So, you know, focusing on culture for them is still a part of the equation relative to a hunker down person that's in more dire straits.
Yeah. So this situation gives you a great opportunity also to win new customers, because if you think about it, your competitors in cutting back may reduce their service levels as they tighten their belt. So this perhaps gives you an opening, you know, especially you think of those lifetime customers, those people they have, but if they stub their foot, that gives stub their toe, that gives you a potential opportunity to get in the door. Look for pockets of less competition out there in the market. You know, normally you get higher margins on smaller work in construction, but a lot of times this situation may create a void in some pocket. It may be the 25 to 50 million range, where you actually find now there are fewer competitors because they can't get bonding or whatever the case is, and that may be a market opportunity. Keep and sell your differentiation. Most of you who are in this sector are there because you differentiate, because you're better than others at a lot of things in construction. Keep that differentiation. Don't give up what you work so hard to get. And then take advantage of the technology innovations others can't afford or can't afford to implement. Provide a higher level of service than others, and take advantage of your superior team and your ability to build better, faster, safer.
So Dennis, we had a question earlier from one of our members, and he said that he's already hearing some of his customers wanting to wait to put their jobs out there because they know they're going to have more attractive pricing. So if you're in the take advantage category, you know, would you say to try to maintain current pricing, or do you have to bow to the marketplace realities?
Well, I think you have to bow to the marketplace realities, but again, there may or may not be reality to that. As different contractors have different challenges, you know, the chance of a subcontractor default or supplier issues, all of those things may be out there as well. I also think it's probably going to take a year or two for this competitive thing to shake out. Part of the reason is, well, it's twofold. One is we had great backlogs going in, but now you take, let's just say on average, a month delay of all work. If you think about that, it's another month that we're going to be catching up. So this lack of competitiveness, the bigger problem right now may be you take these delayed projects, put them on top of other projects that were scheduled to start. Yeah. Now you're actually doubled up.
Yeah, no kidding.
So I wouldn't expect that pricing advantage to come, but customers will know that potential's there. Right. The key is to keep them as your customer. And I forget if I talked about it in here or not later, but one of the keys is to go back and do that value engineering, say, let's do it now as opposed to wait. Find ways for you, again, to add value to your customers, differentiate yourself now. You know, be proactive in those situations instead of being scared of where the customer wants to take you.
Right, good point.
So number 5 here, succession's an important piece of everybody's strategy. I wanted to raise that everywhere. So if you're in this quadrant 2, you probably can continue with your succession planning and plans. You may want to adjust valuation in terms of payment. You know, we're looking possibly to a long slog here, 3 or 4 years, perhaps even. So if you think of, the value of your company, unfortunately, the value of your company has decreased. So let's look at the next group, quadrant 1. And again, just to remind you, quadrant 1, very strong in capital, not as strong in terms of backlog. So that's why we call them future focused. They've got to focus on getting that work in front of them, getting good work in front of them so that they can stay profitable over the long run. Fortunately, they have time. Don't panic. Use your financial capabilities to keep your team in place, invest in efforts to rebuild the backlog, and develop some more lifetime customers. So in a lot of cases, you'll be borrowing tactics from the quadrant 2 strategy, hopefully. Again, it depends how strong your capital is. If you're in the lower part of that quadrant, you may not be able to be as aggressive in this way, right? So you have to consider that. So you do have the advantage of being able to cull again the organization of lower performers. If you got A, B, and C people, that's where we advise you to do this organizational planning so you know where those cuts could best come from. You've got to be looking at your workflow because you can't shoot yourself in the foot by getting rid of people you need to execute the work, right? That just isn't going to work for you. So you have to be very careful there, but know who your lower performers are, and don't think at the top you know that. Get down through your organization and make sure you've got a great opinion and a great decisions on who the best are and who the worst are.
Hey, Dennis,
yes.
If I could jump in here and add a comment, I think this may be true for quadrants 1, 2, and 3, but certainly for 1 and 2, is, think about, as you think about adjusting your team and who's on it for a reduced workload that may be forthcoming. Also think about how that workload and that mix of work might change. Often at times like this, we as contractors can't be as sort of picky and choosy about the projects we want, right? And we only want to do the 10 or $20 million ground up projects because that's who we are. There's probably going to be a need to shift and be less selective and to stay close to those customers and do more service work, do small project work, do upfit work, during this dip in the cycle. So I just encourage our listeners to think about the skill sets that they might need as the mix of work that their clients, are buying over the course of the next 2 or 3 years may change as well.
Yeah, the white paper has a little more discussion of that too, in order to avoid the sort of trifecta of doom, how to be selective and looking at geographies, new types of works, things outside your sweet spot. So stay tuned for that in a few weeks.
Yeah. So in this last item here, it is actually, strangely enough, a good time to raise standards and expectations of performance. Make working for your company a privilege. Don't allow poor performance. This gives you a chance to, just raise the level. Number 3, invest in training and development. So, you may have a slow, a softer backlog, and you may have some slow times. Well, use this time to make your team better, to build that team for the future. The way we've been running in this industry, there hasn't been time to train, time to develop our people. So don't think we have to be always 110% utilized. If you've got strong capital, take the time to develop these people. You'll be a stronger company coming out the back end. Do keep your PE and field engineer and intern programs going. Start building your team for the future. And then for business development, remember, future focus is the theme. Everybody's job. This is a good time to, if you don't have this mode in your company, to get everybody's mindset that getting work is everybody's job. Your future depends on it as a company if you're in this future focus group. So this is a good time to change that and focus on developing tomorrow's lifetime customers today. So looking at quadrant 4, cash focused, obviously these are the folks that still have some backlog, but their capital is not so strong, so they can't afford to trip too many times. So they really need to make sure they're in a great cash position so that if they do hit a bump in the road, they can keep on going. Their backlog, if they can realize it and realize the gross profit from them, that could possibly even push them from quadrant 4 back up into the better capitalized. And of course, that's one of the strategies you have to do now is you have to keep your capital, you know,
Right.
and get there. So first and foremost, and this is actually true for everybody, focus on executing the work you have on hand successfully. So you got a great backlog, but it's only great if you can get to the other end with the profit that's there, right? So if you lose that profitability, the backlog's no good, and you can't afford it because you're not strong enough financially.
The stinker right now would be a real punch in the nose, wouldn't it?
So execute, 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 and make sure your people know the importance of execution through this period. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, as you do these organizational scenarios, you got to keep your successful teams to execute well. You can't cut everybody back, throw people out there and have them overwhelmed and expect them to bring profit. Use your, they always say performance sells. So use your performance and relationships on the current work to keep building the customer work, reputation, business development for the future. Usually because of the cash focus here, we're not suggesting that you build your sales teams at this point, but use your performance to sell for the future. And of course, take care of your current clients and all of that. And then 4, probably most importantly for this group, keep all capital in the company. Suspend or delay succession plans or payments as needed to build capital in the company. Right-size the owner's personal needs and desires for distributions until this capital position improves, and delay any large capital investments. We didn't talk about that much earlier in the cash is king, but if you're, you know, let's just say you're going to buy a $200,000 piece of equipment, well, buy it on credit today. Don't pay it for it in cash. You know, interest rates are low, great advantage for you. So delay those large capital investments. And finally, the hunker down group. And, you know, we hope not too many of you are in this group. You can borrow tactics from quadrant 1, 2, and 4 where it's appropriate. If you're in the hunker down group, it's probably not appropriate unless you're closer to the center of the grid, right? If you're way down there in the corner, you know, then obviously you got to be reacting quicker and harsher and all of those things. So follow all of the things John said to manage the cash flow, to buy the time to survive and build a profitable backlog. John mentioned good to great earlier. The hedgehog theory equation in good to great. You know, they call, you know, for identifying the equation that defines success for your business. Well, in construction, it's really very simple. Gross profit minus overhead equals profit. So as you do your contingency planning and you're looking forward, you have to be profitable. You cannot not be profitable, or your cash position, which is weak going in, and your capital position, which is weak going in, is going to get worse. In the long run, profit creates capital. Losses take from capital. So you've got to make money. You've got to make money on the work you have in front of you. Again, you can't shoot yourself in the foot because you have to execute what you have out there. So, you know, project that run out, see what it looks like, make sure you're break even, you're above break even, lower your break even to where it needs to be to succeed. Create an organizational plan to get there, as John said earlier. Include a productivity plan, possibly with incentives. Now, this might be counter to your way of thinking, but if you have jobs and you know you have to be profitable and you have a team out there, throwing some money out there to execute that level of profitability may be your win-win, all right? Think about that. Do what you can with the balance sheet to prolong your ability to stay in this game. Remember, this is a game of ups and downs over time by economics that you're not even in control of. We're going into a soft period. The profitability of every trade, even in the Great Recession, was still positive except for masonry in 1 year, which went below the line. But everybody else was still profitable on average, and you can be too, you know, but you got to live to tell the tale, so to speak. So retain all distributions, look to reduce your tax deposits if you're not expecting profit levels to be where they are for the coming year. Look at what you can do there. Suspend any succession scenarios that require capital from the company to execute.
Yeah, that's painful for me to hear as somebody who started 30 years ago, basically doing only succession planning. But that makes perfect sense because that does require capital from the company.
It does. So again, just a final look at the situation here at the quadrants, and, you know, again, think about where you fit, how these strategies can apply to you, and how you can even borrow from the other strategies to come up with your best strategy. So at this point, let's look for questions. What have we got any questions that we haven't answered?
And now's a great time to answer questions. And just anyway, go ahead and type those in right now. We'll get to them as we can. A couple things to look forward to. First of all, everybody that registered for the webinar yesterday. Sorry for the hiccup, the IT issue. But everyone that registered will get a copy of the PowerPoint, and in a few weeks' time, a copy of the white paper as well. So the white paper is in process now, and we should have that ready soon. The next thing is we'll probably be doing another webinar in 2 to 3 weeks, and we want to really drill down on the how-to part of stress testing. So whether it's break-even, as Dennis talked about, or doing the financial modeling, as John Woodcock talked about, then we want to get into those things in a little more detail too. So we have a question about handling force majeure notices and impacts, but keeping clients happy. You can't leave the checkbook open. I understand that completely. So I don't know, John, Dennis, what do y'all think?
Well, I'll jump in there. You know, anytime, you know, if you're a trade and putting in a claim or, you know, a tough change order and all of those things, you've got to charge for your costs, and you got to notice people, or you run outside of your contract. And how do you do that and maintain relationships? Well, for me, if the notice you're sending has any harshness to it or is unexpected, it's going to be treated worse, and the relationship may suffer. So you may have to give a call and say, hey, I don't want to do this, but for, you know, legal reasons, just covering the bases, I got to send you this notice. We don't have any costs now, but, you know, the potential's out there, and we should get together and see how we can minimize any impact we're going to have from this.
You know, we're all swimming in the same pool right now. So, you know, whether you're on a job site or whether you're sitting in an ivory tower somewhere writing checks, you know, we're all operating in uncharted waters here. So you can expect that some of your customers will react as gentlemen and gentle ladies, and you can expect that some of your customers might be a little harsher than the reactions, but the reality is you've got to cover your bases.
Well, and you're always dealing with people, so each person's different too, and you know, hopefully you know who will react to what and how they'll react to a certain extent. And you know, doing it, well, I guess can't really do it in person now in a lot of cases, but, you know, maybe doing it by video chat or whatever too. Yeah. Just anything you can do. You know, today's situation makes those things tougher, but, you know, you do have to cover your bases, and you do have to follow your contract and your notice provisions, or you put yourself at risk.
All right, so Will McCauley has a question about, do we see any supply chain and materials issues coming up, and how about delays, price increases, or even reductions to keep the work flowing?
Well, the AGC survey, which they're doing weekly now, but the results came out yesterday, 59% had reported delays or disruptions, and the top category was actually material supply issues. So I think it was 37% were reporting those supplies. There were issues from inspectors and permits. There were issues from manpower, subcontract. Some subs have refused to work. You know, taking care of their people, putting their people before the work. I mean, there's all the whole thing. So it is occurring out there. And the interesting thing is, even when we're past this, it's going to take a while for those disruptions to fade away. So again, as managers, you know, how do we manage that? I mentioned earlier, getting your people to make sure you don't stop at the first call, go down the chain and see where the things are that are coming to you, so you control your destiny as well as you can. But the fact of the matter is, you know, some manufacturers aren't operating, so some things aren't going to get into the supply chain, and you might have to replace things.
Yeah,
let me add to.
Oh, go ahead,
if I could add to that. You know, and I think we answered this in the same way we answered the first question around, you know, force majeure and contracts. A lot of this is we need to do what good contractors do and what good contracting business management is, right? But it's never more critical to do now. So, you know, we notice when there's a delay, whether we're in an economic boom or a recession. It just becomes more critical that we do it today and we do it in the right way. And if that includes a phone call to the right person so our message is well received, we do it that way. In terms of supply chain, I think the answer is similar. Is we've got to be addressing our supply chain, those suppliers in our chain, whether I'm a general contractor and I'm looking at my subcontractors, or you know, a mechanical contractor or a curtain wall contractor, and I'm looking at my source of supply. You know, there's things. Think about, you know, if you're a GC and you got $2 million a $2 million curtain wall package, you know, you especially now need to be thinking about the security of that inventory, right? Is it in a bonded warehouse? Do I have my right to get it? Because if that curtain wall manufacturer were to hit a hiccup and go belly up, you know, that's going to be a significant impact. It's not just going to impact the schedule of the job. It's going to financially impact the job if you don't have your recovery right. So these are all things that we were ordinarily doing. We just need to pay extra attention to them today.
Good answer, John. I'm glad I'm not in operations. I couldn't have thought of all those things.
No, that you scared me, John. Matt has a question about the PPP loan requirement and potentially cutting. Mary Ann had the same question. We've had a couple of people. I think, you know, every banker and every CPA seems to have a different interpretation of how this thing is. I know AGC is working really hard to get some clarity out there in the marketplace. And I'm not sure we're able to answer that question all that well. So I think the two places to turn are, number one, of course, your trusted advisors, but number two, your peer group. The peer groups have done an amazing job at sharing intel across groups for how this thing is working in their state and city. And that's the place to go, Matt, Mary Ann, et cetera, to try to get the best intel on what these new and developing acts mean.
And I'll just add, the AGC has been working hard on that, but there was new clarity today brought into the $39 million thing, which is not supposed to be a factor.
That is not operable, yeah.
But so everybody's for under 500 is eligible, and of course, you know, there are still banks having hiccups in their applications and all of that. So a lot of that varies bank to bank. I've had a lot of people inform me in the last 2 days that they've gotten their stuff in and gotten it approved, just waiting closing. Right.
Dennis, do we have an outlook on government and public infrastructure work, like utilities and road construction?
Well, I don't want to get too political, but supposedly Nancy Pelosi and the administration already have an agreement on the next tranche of stimulus coming out for that, and they're talking about a couple $1 trillion worth. You know, we can't predict how these things will actually come out, but I do believe that infrastructure stimulus will be a part of what the government does next. Unfortunately, for the long term, the government deficits and the lack of tax revenues will work against government spending, I'm afraid, if we look like the years 3 through 5 down the road. But for the next couple of years, I'm highly encouraged that the government's going to step forward on that kind of spending.
But competition is going to go up there too, right? Because everybody, if the government's throwing a lot of money at infrastructure, suddenly there's a lot of infrastructure contractors out there.
Well, except, you know, not everybody can build a road or a bridge or whatever, and frankly, they're mostly busy now. So,
yeah, that's right.
Because that's been up year over year anyway.
All right, we've got only about 1 minute left. I'm sorry we can't get to everyone's questions. So I'd like to close with this. First of all, thanks for participating. Second, in a few weeks, be on the lookout for the white paper, and also be on the lookout for an announcement for our next webinar, how to stress test your construction company. So we want to, you've heard about stress testing back in the Great Recession because they were stress testing all the banks. And you heard John and Dennis talk about stress testing your construction company. So this webinar is going to be a tutorial on how to do it. How exactly, what do you need to do? What 3 or 4 different slices do you need to take in order to really understand where you are financially in your construction company and how to model things going into the future going forward. So thanks everyone. We appreciate your attendance and look forward to getting your feedback.
And if I can just add, if you do have any additional questions, please don't hesitate to email us, and we'll try to get back to you as best we can. You're looking at our phone and email there on the slides.
Very good. All right. Thanks, everyone.